we're going to talk about what the Russians have done in Ukraine today. If you don't know me, my name is Darren Gertis. I'm a management professor who's built multiple leadership programs at Charleston Southern University. We're going to look at this through the lens of leadership. I also wrote a book. It's called I Need Ammunition, Not a Ride, and you can find it on Amazon. Okay, it is Monday, the 23rd of May. It's day 89 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So the Russians have looted Ukrainian wheat, and there are a satellite image from Maxar Technologies that show that Ukrainian wheat is being stolen, loaded on Russian ships, and shipped out on its way to, it looks like, Beirut from just tracking where the ships went. And so the Russians are feeding their war machine by stealing Ukrainian grain, which is pretty awful. Gabrielis Landsbergis. I don't know for a fact. He's Lithuanian. I don't know for a fact, but Landsbergis rings a bell. I was in Lithuania a number of years ago in 2001, and then a couple of times. I've been there 3 times. And Landsbergis was a name of a former president. It might be related, maybe his father or something. But Gabrielis Landsbergis, the Lithuanian foreign minister, proposed a coalition of the willing to defy the Russian naval blockade, which was, I mean, that's pretty intense for him to propose that. Now, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, and the Estonians, that's the Baltic states, they're some of the most, just like Poland, they're some of the most hardcore pro-Ukrainian supporters, or actually anti-Russian support opposers. They are really hardcore supporters of Ukraine, and that's because they've all experienced being overrun by Russia and being dominated by Russian for decades. So they're really significant. Next, according to Zelensky, the Russian army has launched 1,474 missile strikes at Ukraine using 2,275 different missiles. Now, he also said in less than 3 months, there have been more than 3,000 airstrikes by Russian aircraft and helicopters. So, I mean, this is part of his speech. I talk more about it in the book. Vladimir Shishirem, I don't know, that's the name of the Russian tank commander that was in the first war crimes trial. He was sentenced to life in prison for this war crimes trial. And so they're doing this intentionally because they're trying to send a clear message to the Russians that are thinking about committing additional atrocities. Don't do this. This is what's going to happen to you if we catch you. So nearly 50 Russian soldiers are soon to face trial. In Donetsk, separatist leader Denis Pushilin, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, he said that the prisoners from Avastol are being held on the territory of Donetsk People's Republic. This is like, he still has this fantasy of that it's going to be its own republic. Now, if the Russians win, he might be right. It might be its own republic, or it might just be absorbed into Russia proper. But nonetheless, if the Ukrainians win, that dream is over. And so they're being held on this territory, and he is organizing an international tribunal on the republic's territory to try Ukrainian war criminals. So we'll see how that goes. It's kind of a tit for tat. Zelensky signed a new law. This is really important. He signed a new law today that allowed confiscation, quote, confiscation of Ukraine of objects of property rights of the Russian Federation and its citizens. Okay, so the goal of this bill is to confiscate Russian property in order to pay damage for the thing, that they have to compensate for things that have been destroyed and whatever. It's a really dangerous thing. Zelensky said, quote, the procedure of identifying and confiscating the assets of sanctioned persons who are in one way or another support the aggression of the occupiers against Ukraine will allow it to quickly and effectively replenish the Ukrainian budget. Okay, so that sounds good in theory, and I get what they're trying to do, but you have to be really careful about how that's carried out because it could be abused. So Zelensky was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and Davos, Switzerland, is a big to-do every year. He told his audience, this is really the moment when it is decided whether brute force will rule the world. If it rains, our thoughts won't matter to it, and we may no longer convene in Davos. Because what for? Brute force seeks nothing but the subjugation of those it wants to subdue. And he's right. I mean, essentially, are we going to allow brute force to reign, or are we going to be ruled by law? And he goes on. So history remembers many moments when everything changed dramatically. It remembers, for example, how just a few shots can lead to millions of casualties. If these were the shots of June 28th, 1914 in Sarajevo. So he's talking about World War I. And it was, for example, in 1938 in Munich. So he's talking about the kickoff of World War II. And then he ends that speech, and I give more of the speech in the book, but he ends it by saying, if the aggressor loses everything, it definitely deprives him of the motivation to start a war. There's some legitimate logic to that. Okay, now Zelensky gave that speech, and so did Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State during the Nixon administration, he's 98 years old. He gave a video speech from America, and he said, among other things, ideally the dividing line, he's talking about the end game, like how do we end this war? And he said, ideally the dividing line should be a return to the status quo ante. That means that everybody starts where they started before, which means that Russia remains in Ukraine, in that area of the Donbas that they controlled, and in Crimea. Okay, so ideally the dividing line should be returned to the status quo ante. He goes on and talks about a restoration of the Ukrainian borders as they were before the war began in February. Pushing the war beyond that point would not be about the freedom of Ukraine, but a new war against Russia itself. Now, people who are pro-Russian or just want the thing to be over kind of latched onto that and started praising Henry Kissinger for having done that. There's a problem here, though. Okay, it's easy for Henry Kissinger to say that on his side of the ocean where he's not being bombed, but it's a lot different if you're in Ukraine, or if you're, say, in the Baltic states or Poland, and you realize what this really means, because that just means Russia can just regroup and come back whenever they want. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe so that you can see what's going on in future days, or you can go back into our past catalog and see what's happened on previous days. Okay, one more thing. If you were moved by this video and you wish to give to humanitarian aid for Ukraine, there's a link below to Samaritan's Purse. It's a reputable organization that will make sure that the aid gets where it's supposed to go. Thanks for your time.